All right, what I'm asking you to do right now, you all got this handout. I'm going to go over it with you for about 5 minutes. I'm going to give you about 25 minutes to build this, um, to build the interface that you see right here. Okay? And after that, we will start writing the code. Now, my guess is we'll be done no later than 10. I don't know for sure, but that's my guess. All right, so the rest of the period will be lab. And excuse me, the plan is on Monday, we will probably do another example or two. And then, for lack of better words, you're going to be turned loose. And you will be responsible for starting to work on the homework problems. Okay? And that means that Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, all those days I'm going to give you as lab. Now, that's a hell of a lot of lab time. That is 16 hours approximately when you do the math, or 15 plus hours. So I'm going to ask that you turn in whatever you have from chapter 12 by the end of the class period on Friday, or no later than Sunday of next week, because that's when I'll be grading. Does all that make sense? All right. Then the following Monday, so that's a week from this Monday, and I don't know what the heck date that is. The 15th? Yeah, the 15th. That'll be your test on chapter 12. Did everybody hear that? All right. In lieu of giving a practice test or something, we're going over several examples as a class. Now, what we do today, this project ended up going out of control, for lack of better words. And I want to show you what we're going to do. So I'm going to take the final product here, and I'm going to run it for you just so you can see what it looks like. And believe me, I'm not saying, yeah, I'm doing this because this is so frigging fantastic. It's not. But I want to show you what we're able to do. Because in a way, it's going to kind of be a tie-in to when we start working with databases. If you look up on the screen here, so I come in here and I want to add a new book. Okay. Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens, and $50. All right, I hit enter, boom, it gets put into the inventory immediately. You can see that. And this got cleared. All right, plus my focus is there if I want to add another book. I do. Moby Dick, Captain Ahab. All right, and we'll say that that's $34. Boom. Now we've got 2 books in there. Does that make sense? All right. Now, if we want to start adding stuff to our cart, let's say that it's Christmas time and we want to buy 2 Christmas carols and 3 Moby Dicks. All right, so there's 2 Christmas carols. There's 3 Moby Dicks. So 50, 100, that should be $202 if we do this right. I'm not accounting for anything like tax. I don't care. And when I click the total checkout, you'll see that it's $202 and this clears. Does that make sense to everyone? Now, there's an easy way to do this and a hard way to do this. And we're going to talk about both of them in just a bit, okay? But what I'd like to ask you to do in the interim is, as mentioned, 2 things. Number 1, I'd like you to go and build this interface. I don't care about the color or the sizes, etc., but I'd like you to use these particular names for the controls, because that's what I use. So when we write code, it'll make it much easier for you to do. Does that all make sense? All right. So after you get done with that, I'm going to give you literally till, about, let's say about 15 minutes or so. If you need more time than that, fine, I'll ask. All right. But after you do that, please bring up this. Go into a browser window and bring up the URL that's shown there. Questions on what I'm asking you to do? Any questions? Because I'm going to pause the video now and resume it around 8:30, 8:35 or so. Okay, so we'll go till 9. If we don't finish, we'll take a break. We'll finish after the break. Like I said, I envision this taking no longer than 10 o'clock and maybe closer to 9:30. We'll see. All right. Now, in a way, what this is doing is it's going to be our introduction to databases. Because first of all, let's look at the interface. Okay. Now, right now, the bad thing is there's absolutely no persistence in this program. So every time you run it, whatever you'd created earlier is gone. So at a minimum, we should set it up so when you add a book, it adds it not only to the inventory here, but to a file or something. But what we really want to have happen is we want it to go to a database so we can pull that information out. All right. But what we want to do now, think about this. What we could do is, if we're going to validate this, we're going to validate this, we're going to validate this. But assuming it's all valid, okay? So assuming I put a title in here, whatever, a title, an author, and I put a price in here that's greater than 0, or greater than or equal to 0. You with me? So if I do all that and I click this, what that should do is that should create a new book to be existed, or to be created rather. And it actually should call the constructor that's expecting there to be a title, an author, and a price. So it should be calling that. All right. Then what we could do, we could make it kind of hard on ourselves, but we could do this. We could build a string, and in that string, we could basically grab the title, and we could grab the author, and we could grab the price, and we could concatenate them together, and then we could do the name of the list box, .items.add, and we could put that string in there. That'd be totally fine to do it that way, okay? And then when we go the other way, we could basically just copy it from here to here. But there's a few problems with doing that, such as, how about like when we copy it from here to here, we've got to find a way to pull out the price. All right, because right now it's just a string with 3 string values in it. All right. So what we'd really rather have happen is not write any code in that. What we'd really rather have happen is when we click this, we'd like that book to be created, and we'd like our toString method to run and just throw it in here for us automatically. And when we click this button, we'd like it to grab whatever we've highlighted here and put it in there automatically. All right. And it's not just because it's nothing to do with like, oh, because we're lazy. No, because it's the right way of doing things. It would be possible that if we did it where we were constantly creating code to do that, we could make a mistake. We could forget to do something. We could put it in the wrong format. There could be a time we should be checking for an error condition that we're not. So there's all sorts of things that could happen. So what we want to do, and the reason that I had you had you go and look at that URL, is we want to do what's called bind to this list box and bind to this list box. So in other words, when we click this, we want to call the toString method and have it immediately put it in there for us. And when we call this, we want it to call the toString method and immediately put that in there for us. Then when we call the click checkout, we want it to call the checkout root function that's in our book class that we had. Because we shouldn't have to do this. All right? And we don't have to do this, but we also want to make sure that after we click the checkout, it gives us an amount here, and then it clears this. Now, what is this program not doing? I already mentioned one thing. It's not persisting the data. So that's not a good thing. So that's the first thing. It's not doing. What else is it not doing? Well, wouldn't it be kind of nice after we do that, all it's doing is it's checking out and it's telling us the total. Wouldn't it be kind of nice if even if it was a message box, if it maybe prepared like the equivalent of whatever you get at the grocery store, your receipt? Wouldn't it be nice to print out a receipt? You could have the name of each book and the price of each book, the final total. Then if we wanted to, we could come in and add tax. All right, if we wanted to do something like that. All right, and the reason that I mentioned that this is kind of an intro for us into databases, and I want to go back to this is that binding source component overview. Now, I don't want to read to you, but the idea is we want to be able to simplify things. We want it so that if we have written some code to make something happen, we don't want to have to rewrite any of that code. That's just good programming procedure. All right. So, again, read this sentence here, if you would please, yourselves. A conduit, in a way, is like an adapter. It's allowing there to be glue between what you're putting in the program and your class and the list box. All right? And what you're starting to see here too, as we look through this, if I go down here and I look in here, these are the different things that we can use with it. In other words, these are the methods. And then you see we can do sorting and filters, and there's other stuff. I'm not going to go through any of that stuff. But what we're starting to do, whether you realize it or not, is we're starting to dig into the .NET or the C# API. We're starting to burrow our way into the C# application program interface. And what's an API? It's the contract that gets written between you and the programming language, where the programming language says, hey, I'll provide all this neat stuff here for you, but if you're going to use it, you got to use it in the right way. So I can click on any one of these, and I'm just going to grab like the insert. I'm going to right mouse click and open that up in a new tab. And it says, hey, if you want to use it, you can. But notice that if you use it, it's expecting you to use it like this. In other words, it's expecting you to pass in an integer and an object. So like I said, when I said that it's a contract, what I mean is they're built-in routines that you can use, but you must use them in the way that they're expected to be used. You may have noticed this before, you may not have. We've never talked about this, but it is in your book. I think it's later on. But if I double click on the add book, don't worry about you'll have time to put in all this code. If I remove this, I don't use that stuff. I'm just going to get rid of it. The program won't work because the click event expects that you're going to pass to it a sender and event arguments, even if there are none. Even if there are no arguments, it expects that parameter to be there, because basically the application program interface says a click event has to have two different arguments passed into it. So if you want to use it correctly, you've got to use it like that. And when you think about it, we kind of do this all the time. Maybe it's not even a great parallel, but as an example, Mr. Corrigan and I were talking this morning. And he's got a car that sustained some damage, and he's getting it fixed right now. All right. And then, he was talking about the car. I'm not even going to get into it, but it's similar to a car he had when he was a kid. So we were swapping stories about speeding and other stuff like that when we were younger. All right. But the point is, when you think about it, in a way, driving your car is like an API. It's between you and the police department. And it's also between you and the Department of Motor Vehicles. The Department of Motor Vehicles, I believe it's 2022 when my driver's license expires. So what it says is sometime between now and then, if I want to keep my license, all right, if I want to keep my license, I sure as hell better go into the DMV and do whatever I have to do. All right. And I'm going to give you a quick aside. I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to give you, sorry, it's going to take 2 or 3 minutes. You're going to either laugh or say, well, I don't care. But when I was living in Rockton, Illinois, my driver's license was due. So being a good person, this was the week before, all right, I went to the DMV, and the DMV that I went to was real close to the town I lived in. It was the next town over. It was really, really small. And maybe you've been to some of those DMVs that are real little like that. The one in Wentzville was, I'm not kidding you, 5 times bigger than the one I went to. All right, and people were out the door. And I was maybe the 20th person in line. So when I finally got in, there were 2 people working there. One of them was a heavy-set woman, and I only say that because you could really hear her wheezing. And literally when I got up, yeah, what do you want? I said, like to, you know, renew my license. Okay. So I gave her all the paperwork. I gave her the I gave her the check. I gave her everything. She even gave me a receipt back. I will tell you right now, one of the morals of this story is save that receipt, okay? Because I didn't. Guess what? She never put my information into their computer. I drove around for nearly 3 years without a valid license. If I'd have been in an accident, I would have been jailed. I mean, literally, I would have been put in jail. The way that they found it out was American Family, who's my insurance company, was doing a routine audit, and it flagged me as somebody who was driving without a license. And I'm like, I got a license. And I showed it to them. They're like, no, you don't. So I had to go back into the DMV again. I had to take the driver's written test again. I had to take a regular driver's test when I went out with somebody again. And then they gave me my license. All right. But the point is, I was trying to follow the application program interface. I was trying to follow the guidelines. All right. I was lucky in that technically I didn't follow them, but I didn't have any real repercussions. All right. The repercussions you get in your program are if you try to use something that's built in that you're using wrong, or you haven't, like when we did that reference the other day, if you don't give yourself a reference to it, you're hosed. It just isn't going to work. All right. So we're going to do one thing, and then we're going to take our break now. All right. What we want to basically do is we're going to want to add this using book library in here. But again, don't just type that in. I want you to do what we did the other day, and that is I'm taking for granted that you all have the book library and you all just made a books GUI. All right. So I want you to right mouse click on your new project that you just created that's called Books GUI, and I want you to go to Add, and I want you to go to Reference. I'm showing it on the screen right now if you need it. So you're right mouse clicking on the project, make sure it's the one that says Books GUI. You're right mouse clicking, you're choosing Add, and you're going to Reference. And when you go there, it may come up and look just like this, and it may not. If yours comes up and does not look like this, go to Projects and Solutions over on the side here. If yours does look like this, make sure where it says Book Library, make sure that it's checked. If it is checked, just click OK. If it's not checked, check it and click OK. You with me? Then you should be able to add this line. If you try to and you still can't, don't worry about it. It'll come up later where you will be able to. All right? So it is about 8:58. Let's please come back at 10 after 9. And like I said, I believe we'll have this finished hopefully around 10 o'clock or so. All right? I've got, how many lines of code? There's enough, close to 200, but a lot of them, we're going to be doing a lot of copying and stuff. All right? All right, so I'm going to start up. Was everybody able to add that reference? Anybody have any problems doing that? All right. Again, I'm going to give you plenty of time to type. So what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is rather than you just typing away, if you just listen for a second, we're going to have 3 global variables in here. You can see them in blue. We're going to create a new BookStore object, very similar to what we did yesterday in the console application. So by creating that, when we type BS dot, it's going to allow us to access the different methods that are in our BookStore class. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. Okay. Now, again, please just let me go over these lines first, okay? So what this is doing here is we're creating a new variable right there. It's called inventory binding source. And we want to bind that to our inventory list. So as we add things to our inventory list, we want them to basically be in there. All right. And we're doing the same thing with our shopping cart list. So again, these are all the books that are in our inventory. These are all the books that are in the shopping cart. So in other words, they're these and these. All right. And this stuff that's here, all this is a visual representation here of what's inside of, oh, dang it, of what's inside of the inventory list. Hopefully that makes sense to you. And this is just a visual representation of what's inside of the shopping cart list. There is actually nothing special about them. I accidentally clicked this, double clicked it, so I want to remove that. So give me a second here. All right. So again, what we're doing here is we are setting that up, and then we're saying the data source for what we're about to do is going to be the cart list. I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever, but what we're doing right there is we are binding the information that is inside of that combo box, the thing we call inventory, whatever it is. We're binding that to our list. So we're making sure that when we put something in here and in here and in here and it's valid and we click add, not only does it go into our inventory list, but it goes in there. And we're making sure that if we choose something from here and click this button, not only does it go into our shopping cart list, but it goes in here. If that doesn't make sense, I'm sorry, I can't think of any other way to explain it than that. And again, for lack of better words, much of the stuff that we're putting in here is just what would be referred to as boilerplate code to make this work. So this is basically binding the inventory data source to the cart list and to the associated list box. And this one, all right, so this is the inventory data list. That's that one. And then that one's doing it to, again, not to the cart. This one is to the inventory list. And this one is to the cart list. Now, after we do that, we have to tell it what we want to do and what we want it to put in there. So really, this, more than anything, let's change this. We'll say that this one is basically binding the inventory data source to the inventory list, and this is binding the cart or shopping cart, whatever you want to call it, cart data source to the cart list. All right? And then what we have to do is actually bind them to the list box, the associated list box, whatever you want to say. And call the toString method to populate the list box. Like I said, I'm not saying, does that make a lot of sense? It's just, I don't know if you call it a necessary evil or what you'd call it, but this is the shopping cart data resource. And then when we're all done, all right, whoops, it's the wrong place, sorry. Then all we're doing, and I'm not going to put a comment here, this is just putting the focus back on our first field. That's all. So please go and take a couple minutes and grab everything that's, make it a little smaller so you can fit the whole thing in here. Hopefully, Christopher, you can read that okay from back there. But go and open up your Forms Load event. How do you do that? click on an empty spot in the form someplace. Am I right in assuming you all had time to type this in? No? Then type that in first. So put that right underneath your public forum books. And then go back to your form. Just double click someplace on the form, a blank space, and that'll bring up the form's load event. There's other ways you can do it. That's probably as good a way as any. Move this up a bit. There. That'll give you most of the stuff that you have to do here. Has everybody now put in these 3 lines? I have to move this down. So one more time, it is saying that the data source that we're going to use and we're going to call this, it's getting the information from here. The other data source that we're going to use that's called this is going to get its information from here. All right. Then this is literally here. This is linking up that data source with that list box. And it says inside of that list box, we want you to display the toString. All right. Now, if we had in here, and I didn't have time to set up anything like that, but if we had it in there where we had a file that had some initial values, they would show right in form load. All right. But we want to set this up in form load because we're using this throughout the program. And in much the same way, this is saying take that cart binding source that we set up above, all right, and we're going to be basically doing the same kind of work. All right. All right. Then here is the add book. But before you put it in, let me explain to you something real quick. So I'll give you time, please. But this looks like the old way that we did things. I didn't want to use this. But I want to show you why I did it this way. What I wanted to do, did I keep that? No, I didn't. All right. Do you remember? I'm not going to bring it up, but do you remember when we did the product maintenance and the customer maintenance and we had a validator class? All right. And in there we had that is present and is valid email, etc. I wanted to write one of these or one of those. And I guess I could have, but I wanted to make sure that any classes I wrote were compatible with both the GUI version and the non-GUI version of this program. And if you remember, that validator class was checking the text boxes, which are not compatible with the console version of the program. So I put the code inline right in here. So I'll give you a chance to put it in, but let me go through it first. What are we doing? It's the old keep going thing. All right. So I'm calling validate title, and look at how easy these are. If you trim it and there's nothing in it, set the return value to false and make sure the focus is there. When we start, we set the return value to true. So it's either true and we skip this if that's false, or if this is true, it's false and then we return it. Does that make sense to you? Because then we do the exact same thing with the author. Now, one of the things that they did in the book, if you remember this, by using that tag class, is they wrote just one generic routine. All right? I just did it this way because I did it this way. All right? So the author is the same, and then there was more work to do in the price. Because first we had to, so I put the whole thing in a try-catch block. If there was nothing in there, now what I did was I threw a new format exception. And I came down here and just put the message box right there, set it to false, etc. If it was less than 0, I just threw an argument out of range exception. And again, I put in a message box, set return value to false, etc. All right. So let me put this up there, and I'm trying to explain it. Normally I'd be typing it with you, but I just thought it would take way too long to do this. So I thought I'd give it to you and explain it as I'm going along. Maybe this is a better way of doing it. Maybe it's a worse way. I don't know. So start typing. I'm going to give you 5 or 10 minutes to put in the stuff that's between lines 40 and 57, and I'm going to move it down. You're going to get an error if you call validate title and you haven't written validate title yet. And the same thing with validate author and validate price. Don't worry about it. You'll have the code for those momentarily. All right. So I'm going to move it down to the next one. And there you go. So typically we wouldn't do it this way, but I just think it's better for today because we're kind of foraging, for lack of better words, new ground. This is stuff we haven't talked about before. All right, I moved it down a little further so you can get the catch for the format, and in just a second I'll move it down a little more so you get the catch for the other one. So there is the, when you click the add button, I just called add to shopping cart. The whole routine is right there. And again, I just want to take a couple minutes. Make sure you understand everything that's in here. All right. The hardest part, of course, is working with this binding source because we haven't used it before. All right. And as I mentioned, it's one of the reasons we want to use it is it's something that is available to us that allows us to write less code. All right. So we set all that stuff up in our load event, and then it was the add event. And again, in the add event, I wanted to make sure that I was validating all three of the fields that we were putting in. So I was validating the title field, validating the author field, and validating the price field. Now, I could have, notice I put a bunch of these in there. I could have, as I've done before, just written one big message box.show routine. All right. Literally, I wrote this morning, so I didn't spend a lot of time on it, just not lying to you. So, validate the title. If the title was valid, meaning there was something in it, validate the author. If the title was not valid, just say no title entered. All right. If validating the author was valid, meaning there was something in it, validate the price. If validating the author was not valid, give a message box that said no author. All right. Finally, if validating the price was valid, then we know all three fields have been validated. So if that was the case, remember the price was read in, but it's read in as a string. So I converted it to a decimal. Then I added, why did I do it this way? Because again, I do want you to understand, if you look up on the screen, please, for just a second, this line right here, I know it's over 3 lines, but that thing in blue, that is calling this right here. You have to kind of understand the correlation. We are creating a brand new object right there, sorry. All right. Now, originally I just put it into a message box to make sure it was working. That's why that's there. You don't have to do that. All right. But unlike some of the programs that we've been doing lately, or the one we did yesterday, this one, you've got it all at one time. And I realize that's a little bit harder to do. So when we go over an example, we'll go over at least one on Monday, and then we'll see where we are. But we're going to do it more like we did yesterday, in that we're going to write a little code and then test it. Write a little code and then test it. All right. So the validate routines, again, the first two were virtually identical to one another. And there's different ways that we could have done this too. All right. But I mean, the whole routine is what? About 10 lines, 11 lines, 12 lines? I don't know, but it's not big. Okay. And then the validate price, that had the most code in it. So again, as I mentioned, so if in this case, if there was no price at all, I put a format exception. All right. And I could have checked for anything else. I could have written my own non-numeric or is numeric thing, because we've done that before. All right. And if it was a format exception, all I did was print out a message box that said it was a non-numeric format, set my return value there to false, removed anything because I put bad stuff in there, so to speak, and then reset the focus. On the other hand, if we put in a negative price, I called an argument out of range exception. And in that case, I said negative price input. I again set the return value to false. I again cleared out whatever was in the text box, and I again set the focus. All right, regardless of how we do this, we're getting down here at the end. And ret val was originally set to true, so it's either still true, or because we have called basically one of the two catch statements, we've fallen into that, it's going to be false. And this is the add to cart button. That's that kind of chunky button that was in between the two list boxes. I could have done all this code inline. There's not a whole lot of code there. But again, get used to not putting code right in the click event of different routines. And again, why for that? Because if you come back and you start adding things like menus, all right, you don't want to be calling a click event from a button from a click event in a menu, or vice versa. Just not recommended. So adding the book to the shopping cart was just that. Now, if you notice in here, because I didn't mention this, I'm doing a cast right here. See that? I'm doing a cast. And the reason I have to do a cast is because by default, that list box inventory.selected item, that's a big string. But by casting it into a book, it's going to basically do the equivalent of breaking it down for us into the three fields. Then we add it to our cart list. We update this. And if you noticed on here, most of these, if not all of them, say false at the end. And it's something that's sort of database related, but not quite. Technically, what that means is, has the schema changed? So what they're saying there is, have you just changed the data? Or have you changed the way the data is being written or shown? We're not. We're just changing the data. So we set that to false. If you were actually changing the way this looked, then we would have set it to true. When we start talking about databases and we talk about schema, the schema will be the name of all of our database fields, the type of our database fields, and sometimes we might set size constraints. That's the schema in that case. All right. Then finally, there was, again, the checkout, which I just called make purchase. And that's pretty simple. This is calling the checkout routine from our BookStore class, which was right there, which just looped through everything that we had put in and grabbed all of the costs. So again, the idea behind what we did yesterday with the console project and what we just did today with this one, the idea behind the two was to just kind of bring you up to speed. Now, most of the time, you're probably not going to sit there and say, gee, I'm going to write this thing as a console app, and then I'm going to rewrite it as a GUI app. All right? There are a lot of console apps out there, believe it or not. Literally, I took a class back when it was Visual Basic. I took a class at a college in Illinois, a technical college. It wasn't very good, but I took it many, many, many years ago. And we walked into class the first day, and it was interesting because there were 25 seats and there were 40 of us. So you can imagine, they figured a lot of people wouldn't come, but just about everybody did. And the guy said, if I could talk to you during the break, if there's something simple you need, you don't even have to be in the class. And there was one guy in that class, I'm not making this up, he had a console app, and it worked. And they were happy as hell with it. And all he wanted was for somebody to show him how to make a GUI, so he could take that console app and basically just put a button in it, click it, and have everything happen. The guy showed it to him, so we were down to 39 after our break. All right? But what I'm saying is there is a place in here. When you think about a payroll app, as an example, because that's the one that's kind of tried and true, classic. If you're writing a payroll app, you probably don't have a lot of reason to make that a GUI. Unless you're constantly doing an app for different people. But if it's the same people, and what do? You've got different files. You've got, or you use a structure like we just talked about, or a class or whatever, but you've got a person and you read in their name, etc., the hours they worked, etc., If there's somebody who works 40 hours a week, you don't even have to do that. All right? It's really not that difficult to do. Sometimes you are writing things for someone else and they want their own little quirk with it. And that's when you're going to be writing a lot of actual GUI applications. But the idea, one of the things, or one of the biggest things you are hopefully supposed to get out of this class is how to understand algorithm development, and how to take a problem and break it down into a series of steps, put those steps together, all right, and be able to solve a problem. So again, and I know we looked at this yesterday, I'm still not sure. I'll look at it, I promise you, before next week. But where are they? So here was the 12 labs new. Here. And we also had the other one that didn't say new, I think. 12 lab new part 2. Okay, whatever. All right. So we'll look at, I don't know which ones of these we'll look at. I'm going to look at them this weekend. At least one that we do will be very similar, probably, if there is any, to what we've done before. I did mention I wanted to do that bank one with you. That's a little bit more difficult. So maybe we'll do one other one first. I don't know. All right. And again, I'm going to stop taping when I say this, but